When I was in my early 20s, I worked maintenance at a daycare facility in a small, foggy town outside of Eureka, California. The place was called Mercy Pines. It was located in a two-story building attached to an old Baptist church and primary school. It had that classic early 70s construction feel: low ceilings, wood paneling, faded bulletin boards, and lots of harvest gold and avocado green that hadn't been updated since my parents were young. But the job paid well, and I needed work. The job entailed pretty much everything: trash, furniture setups for events, preventive maintenance, organizing supplies, and keeping the place safe. That included reporting anything that seemed off, especially stuff that might lead to child abuse or neglect. Some days I opened the building at 5:30 a.m. Other days I locked it down at night. And that particular night, that was a Friday, which meant I was closing up solo. The guy who trained me, Greg, mid-60s, quiet, Baptist as hell, always dipped out early on Fridays to beat the bridge traffic. He showed me the checklist before he left: clean the classrooms, pack up the last of the autumn decorations, take them to the basement, and bring up the Christmas bins. The crates were big Rubbermaid containers filled with garlands, paper snowflakes made by previous classes, plush Santas, etc. The teachers did the decorating, but it was my job to lug the bins up and down the stairs. By the time I got to it, it was nearly 6:30 p.m. The sky was pitch black, and the building was empty. Or, it should have been. I always locked the side doors first, then the front entrance. Nobody was getting in or out, not without a key. Now, let me tell you about the basement. It was straight out of a horror movie. I absolutely hated going down there. Technically used for storage, the place was a cross between a crawl space and a full-height basement, depending on which part you were in. I'm 6'4", and in some corners I had to crouch. The only lighting came from weak bulbs in random sockets and the faint glow that spilled from the stairwell. In the daylight, those tiny foundation windows lit things up okay. But at night, it was a dead zone. Cold, damp, and silent. It held the overflow toys, those big plastic little Tykes cars, faded jungle gyms, chalkboards, tricycles, off-season stuff. The hallway led past the boiler room, which always hissed and clanked like it had its own heartbeat, and ended at the storage room. As I started bringing crates down, I admit I was being a bit lazy. I stacked the Thanksgiving bins near the base of the stairs, not bothering to organize them. I was halfway up the steps with the first Christmas crate when I heard it. A kid's laugh. It was distant, muffled, but unmistakable. I froze. My hand gripped the stair rail so hard my knuckles ached. The laugh didn't immediately come again, so I chalked it up to memory, stress, or maybe something echoing from outside. Then I heard it again. Higher pitched this time, like a giggle, playful. I dropped the crate and bolted upstairs. I went room to room, playroom, nap room, bathrooms, office. Nothing. Every classroom was empty, locked, and dark. The only place I hadn't checked was the basement. I walked slowly to the stairwell door. It was still cracked open from when I had gone down. I listened, and then clatter, a plastic sound, something being pushed or rolled. I rushed down yelling, "Hey, who's down there?" I hit the light switch. It barely lit the room, casting dark shadows in the corners. I grabbed my flashlight and made my way to the end of the hallway. As I turned into the storage room, I saw it. One of the plastic cars, the kind kids sit in and push with their feet, was rolling slowly before coming to a stop. There was no breeze. The floor was not inclined. There was no possible way it had moved on its own. Yet somehow it had. I searched. Every corner, every box, every bin. I even looked inside the containers, just in case some poor kid had gotten stuck. But the lids were heavy plastic. You'd need an adult to close yourself in. And still, that feeling. That oppressive, suffocating feeling that I was being watched. Like something was breathing just behind me. The hair on the back of my neck stood up as I stood there contemplating what to do next. Then, from somewhere in the far corner, I heard the unmistakable sound of something plastic dropping onto concrete. I didn't turn. I didn't breathe. I ran. I sprinted up the stairs and slammed the basement door shut. I leaned against it, heart hammering, as I listened. And from the other side of the door, I heard a whisper. Not a word, just a breathy, raspy whisper, like a child playing hide-and-seek. I called Greg. He didn't even hesitate. If you think there's a child in the building, you have to call the police. But here's the thing. I knew there wasn't. I called 911 anyway. Just to be sure. I wouldn't have been able to live with myself if I was wrong. The cops arrived 15 minutes later. They were polite, but skeptical. Two of them came down with me. We turned on every light. We opened every container. We moved every damn box. We found absolutely nothing. No kid. No drop toys. Not even a rolling car. In fact, the one I saw move earlier, it was stacked behind two bins, like it hadn't been touched in weeks. They thanked me for being cautious, but I could tell they thought I'd imagined it. One of them even said, "Old buildings make weird sounds. Air pressure shifts, you know?" I nodded, but I didn't believe it. Later that week, I casually mentioned it to the church secretary. She immediately went deathly pale. She said there'd been reports from teachers over the years, kids talking about the boy with the dirty face, or teachers hearing giggles in the halls after hours. Greg, too, had heard things. Once, he told me, he'd seen the silhouette of a child on the stairwell, but the building was empty. But here's the real kicker. In the old records, back when the building first opened in the 60s, it wasn't a daycare. It was an orphanage. A fire had broken out in the boiler room in 1971. Most of the kids were evacuated, but not all of them. Sadly, one little boy, age 6, was missing. His body was never found. They say he used to hide in toy bins during hide and seek. I quit the job 2 days later and never went back. But sometimes when I happen to pass by Mercy Pines, I wonder if anyone ever brought up those Christmas decorations. I wonder if they too heard laughter, or if they saw any toy cars inexplicably move across the floor. And I wonder if the boy in the basement is still waiting to play. My name is Bennett. This story took place a few years ago when I was in my mid-20s. Back then, I was sharing a shabby little rental house with my cousin Derek in a quiet little town in Oregon. It was just a 2-bedroom fixer-upper surrounded by tall pine trees and the kind of silence that's peaceful by day and downright oppressive at night. I'd never really believed in the paranormal. I always said I'll believe it when I see it. Well, my experiences started on a Wednesday night. I was in the kitchen, alone, rinsing dishes after a late dinner. Derek had gone out to his girlfriend's place, so I was enjoying having the house to myself. I remember exactly what I was doing, scrubbing an old pan, when I heard a crash behind me. I spun around, heart pounding loudly. A plastic tumbler had fallen from the top of the cabinet to the floor. It had bounced a couple times, then just lay there like it had been thrown. I stared at it, thinking maybe it had been too close to the edge, but I knew I'd put it firmly in place. I picked it up, shook my head, and put it back where it belonged, pushing it farther away from the edge. That should have been it. Just one weird moment. But later that night, while I was in bed, I noticed a faint glow filtering through the blinds. Not bright like a flashlight, but more like the kind of soft shimmer you'd get from an old neon sign flickering in the fog. We didn't have any neon signs in our area, no street lamps either. I dismissed it, rolled over, and told myself I was tired and it wasn't anything to worry about anyway. The next day, it rained heavily. This is Oregon after all. Derek was at work and I was home alone again. Around noon, another loud thump came from the kitchen. I got up from the couch and walked in slowly. It was that same damn cup, now lying on the linoleum like it had been deliberately tossed. Only this time, it had been pushed from the very center of the cabinet. There was absolutely no way it just slipped. I picked it up, placed it on the counter this time. I did my best to shake off the unease creeping into my spine. But then, I heard something upstairs. A soft, deliberate creak. It sounded like it came from my bedroom. I froze, staring up at the ceiling. Derek wasn't home, and no one else had a key. Thunder cracked outside as I grabbed the nearest thing I could use as a weapon, a heavy flashlight. Slowly and reluctantly, I made my way up the stairs. I flicked on the lights as I entered my room. It looked completely normal. The bed was made. Closet doors were shut. Nothing seemed out of place. But I still checked the closet, looked under the bed, even opened the attic hatch. Nothing. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, like I was being watched. That night, when Derek got home, I told him everything. He kind of laughed it off, but I could tell he was a little freaked out too. We stayed up late watching TV, trying to make light of it. Eventually, we both tried to forget about it and went to bed. I woke up around 2 a.m. My room was completely dark, the kind of inky blackness that renders the human eye useless. Then I heard it, a tap, then another. It sounded like fingernails tapping on the window glass. My stomach twisted as chills ran down my spine. I live on the second floor. Surely there's no way someone could be at my window. I rolled over, barely breathing, and forced myself to look. I saw nothing. I fumbled for the flashlight I'd left on my nightstand earlier. I moved the light around my room from side to side. There was nothing there. No silhouette, no shadow. I turned off the light and pulled the blinds aside. No one had climbed a ladder to scratch at my window. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I sat in the living room, lights on, heart pounding like a war drum. The worst part came 2 nights later. Same time, 2-something a.m. I was half asleep when I heard my name whispered, "Bennett." I bolted upright. The voice had come from inside my room. I scanned the room, eyes adjusting to the dim light cast by the flickering nightlight I'd started using. There, in the far corner by my dresser, something moved. It was tall. Really tall. Like it had to hunch to fit under the ceiling. I could barely make out the outline of its shoulders and long, ratty hair. I froze in absolute terror. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't even breathe. The thing just stood there, unmoving, watching me. I grabbed the lamp on my nightstand and flicked it on. It vanished under the bright light. No shadow, no trace, like it had never been there. I ran to Derek's room and banged on the door until he let me crash on his floor. I told him everything. This time, he didn't laugh. I didn't sleep in my room after that. For the next 2 weeks, I stayed with a friend across town until I could afford to move out. I've never seen anything like that figure again. I hope I never do. But sometimes, when the lights are off and everything's quiet, I think about that whisper. And I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't turned on the lamp. This happened just a few months ago, and I haven't spoken about it much, mostly because I'm not sure anyone would believe me. My name is Mark, and I'm in my early 30s. I live alone in a modest third-floor apartment in Tacoma. I'd like to preface this by saying that I'm not on any medications. I don't have a history of hallucinations. I don't drink. No sleepwalking, no weird family history, nothing. Just an average guy with a steady job in commercial construction and a habit of pushing myself too hard. That night had been a long one. I'd worked 10 hours on a cold weather pour, then hit the gym like I always do, part stubbornness, part therapy. By the time I pulled into the parking lot of my complex, I was running on fumes. I picked up some greasy food from a drive-thru and collapsed onto the couch, still in my work clothes, the smell of concrete dust and sweat clinging to me like a second skin. I inhaled the burger, half watching whatever was playing on the TV, then dozed off right there on the couch, wrapped in a blanket I'd stolen from my old college dorm. When I blinked awake, the room was dark except for the dim flicker of the TV screen. It was 11:14 p.m. I remember thinking, just get up, brush your teeth, and go to bed properly. But the blanket was warm, the couch was molded perfectly to my back, and I was utterly exhausted. I almost fell back into the bliss of sleep when I remembered my contacts were still in. Reluctantly, I stood, padded to the bathroom, and fumbled them out of my eyes. Relieved that I could finally go back to sleep, I headed toward my bedroom. Just as I reached the door, I heard it. My name, clear as day, a woman's voice, soft, calm, like she'd known me forever. "Mark?" It came from the living room. At first, I froze. The voice wasn't harsh or threatening. If anything, it was familiar. That made it worse. I turned around and walked slowly back into the living room. I flipped on the overhead light. Nothing. The room was empty, quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. I called out, "Mom?" Out of instinct, I guess. But my mom lives 3 states away, and I hadn't seen her in months. Still, I pulled out my phone and called her. She answered groggily and confused. She'd been asleep. No, she hadn't called me. No, she hadn't been here. I hung up and stood in my living room, trying to laugh it off, telling myself I was overtired. Just a dream bleeding into sleep-deprived reality. So I went to bed. I don't know how much time passed. An hour? Maybe less. I was lying there, trying to fall asleep, still uneasy. That's when it happened again. Same voice, same calm tone. "Mark." Only this time it was closer. Inside my bedroom, I shot upright. My heart started hammering so loud I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. At first, I saw nothing, but then my eyes adjusted. There was a figure at the foot of my bed. A tall silhouette, easily over 6 feet, with long, disheveled hair that hung like wet vines over its face. I saw the faintest trace of features, but they were not quite human, too narrow, too long, as if someone had smeared a face downward like wet paint. Her limbs didn't hang right. The shoulders were crooked, one higher than the other, her arms limp and lifeless like they didn't belong to her. She looked cobbled together. I couldn't scream. I couldn't move. I fumbled in a blind panic for the lamp on my nightstand, knocking it over before finally getting the light on. She was gone. There was nothing at the foot of my bed. I leapt from the mattress in a panic. I threw open the closet, then dropped to check under the bed. Nothing. I sprinted down the hallway to the bathroom, checked the kitchen, even opened my front door. I checked every window, every lock. Nothing. It was just me in that apartment. Me and whatever had whispered my name. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. I just sat up in bed with the lights on until morning, trying to convince myself it was a dream. A stress-induced hallucination, maybe. I was exhausted, after all. I've moved since then, to the opposite side of the city. I haven't had another experience like this, and hope I never do. But every now and then, when I'm lying in bed with the lights off, when I'm just starting to drift off to sleep, I swear I hear her again. I remind myself it's just my imagination. I can't let myself accept that it's anything else. Please like and subscribe for more creepy stories.